Caroline Press, and I'm going to be talking about the second video project topic, the one on Buddhist and positive psychology. The first part of the topic talks about orphans and children who are abused or children who have unhealthy parents and how their personality development is affected. I have this first picture of positive psychology, which shows the individual's smiley face, and I thought that was pretty appropriate. Positive psychology focuses on the individual, and they focus on subjective positive experience and positive traits to explain resiliency and how they develop. So the little smiley face among all of the others have one. And then Buddhist psychology is mainly about monitoring your thoughts. So you have the Buddha inside the man's brain. Maslow's hierarchy of needs basically is a structure for the usual development of children. So you address their physical, safety, and emotional needs, and then they can self-actualize. But in abused children, this doesn't really apply all that much, at least to those abused children who have really strong amounts of courage and resiliency, like Hauser had, because he was deprived of all of those four cognitions that Maslow talks about. But he made it a point, even in that little blurb at the beginning of the chapter, to say that when he was little, he said that his mother would never make him stop trying to survive. Like he had this innate pull to survive. So, as it says here, the will of growth to prevail can overcome physical needs until a time when it is possible to meet them. So until his school was able to pull him out of that negative environment that he grew up in. And there's the picture with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So in David's situation, even after he was adopted by his foster family, he still had underlying self-esteem issues that didn't really get resolved until after the fall of his first marriage, which basically was implied to have failed because of his self-esteem issues. But it's very surprising that that's all he walked away with as a negative consequence of his horrendous childhood situation. And this was in part thanks to the social worker, the school, and the foster family that he was placed with after. And then this is the book that he wrote about his childhood experiences. A child called It. And it's just a quote. I thought that was really appropriate to put because even he says that your experiences, they happen to you anyway, but it's how you deal with them that determines how you end up, which is very fitting for him. It also emphasizes that even when the nurture aspect is lacking, the natural temperament of abused children can enable them to endure until their situation improves. And without this, they surely would have ended up far worse psychological problems. And then we're going to get to the second part of the second topic, which says that you need to choose some concepts that the Dalai Lama was talking about in the video and compare and contrast them with other personality theories that have been presented. The main ones that stuck out to me really were Karen Horney, Abraham Maslow, and the biological theories of evolution. All of those were either very similar or had some aspects that were very different to what he said, which I thought was appropriate. So Karen Horney's basic anxiety and moving away. The Dalai Lama talks about the first experience we have as birth as being positive and leading us to trust, like this biological factor leads us to have a large amount of trust toward our parent, he says your mother in particular. But in Horney's theory, you have basic anxiety, which is the feeling of being alone and isolated in the world, and basic hostility, which is the initial distrust of your parent, despite them meeting your physical needs. And it says that both have to be suppressed in order for healthy development to happen. So those are two very opposite ideas. And he also describes near the end of the video that using self-centered pronouns increases the likelihood of heart attacks. And he says that this is probably because their thoughts are self-centered, which pushes them away from being able to connect to other people. And this sounds very similar to the orientation type moving away that Karen Horney described. So those were very similar. And then you have Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is very similar when it comes to both unwanted children and normally developing children. So the Dalai Lama talked about the unwanted children that he saw in Poland, and he said that if they are put into good foster families, they can eventually recover. But he does mention that there will always be lingering problems after severe abuse. And Maslow's hierarchy of needs describes something similar because children have to have the 4 cognitions, knowing that they'll be fed, are safe, and are loved before being able to self-actualize. But there's an effect that is mentioned about those deprived of basic needs. So in the chapter it was talking about people that were deprived of those 4 basic cognitions when they were small tend to almost hoard those emotions. Like they require extra love and extra food, and they liken it to be like adults being on a diet. Like people who have dieted before store fat more readily than people that haven't dieted. They basically made a comparison to that and the 4 basic cognitions. So abused children tend to hoard them more as a result. So then the biological theories of personality. This one was the one that was most interesting to me personally, because there were some things that were really similar and some things that were really not. So the Dalai Lama talked about the inheritance of compassion from his mother, and he's describing one of the developmental stages of biological theories called imitation, like you learn from your parents or from your siblings, from people that are around you when you're growing up. And in his case, he imitated his mother's compassion. And then temperament is similar to what the Dalai Lama referred to as the intrinsic seed of hope that is planted within us at birth that our needs will be met. It also explains why some abused children deal better psychologically with their trauma after. So this intrinsic resiliency, for example, that Pelzer had was what enabled him to survive as long as he had. If he hadn't had that temperament, if he had been maybe more passive, more closed in, he probably would have been much worse off. And then the last one, which was the sexual behavior of women. In the biological theories chapter, it says that women are supposed to mate with the best male trait that will ensure the survival of their offspring. But mothers, like Pelzers, that abuse their children go against this entirely. They're almost trying to kill their own children. And the Dalai Lama didn't touch on the well, he did say that even an abusive mother cared enough for the child to have them live past the point where they couldn't provide for themselves. But after that, it doesn't really explain how they can continue to behave in such a way towards their children. It's biologically not supported. And then these are the sources. So I hope that was everything that I needed to have, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation.